Chapter 9. Henry heard Eleanor singing almost every night, a tune he had never heard before. He had never been one for eavesdropping, but he had listened to every word. Among Eleanor's growing list of fine attributes, Henry could now add singing. A week had passed since their wedding, and he felt he was finally coming to know her a little better. Their conversations mostly consisted of matters of business, as he taught her about the estate and the income it brought in, and the responsibilities she would have as hostess. They planned to invite her family to come for dinner often, and he hoped to introduce her to the neighbours as soon as she was comfortable. He rarely saw Eleanor outside of mealtimes, for she and Arthur often explored the grounds and house without him. He did not need an invitation, but he would have liked one. He felt bothersome to request to join them. They were adjusting to their new home, and he needed to stay out of it. He simply wished Eleanor would care to see him. He had not realised his frustrations on the matter until he had come to his fencing room that morning. He raised his épée and advanced on his opponent, Silas, his valet. This fencing match took even less time than usual, considering Henry always fought harder when there was a great deal on his mind. He disarmed Silas within 2 minutes, driving him against the wall and pressing the tip of his épée against his chest. Silas lifted his mask, a broad grin on his face. "You've gotten better, sir. I wish I could give you more of a fight." He wiped a bead of perspiration from his forehead. "Your brother's the only one I've seen give ye a challenge." Henry smiled, lifting his own mask. Even so, Henry could count less than 5 times that Edward had bested him. Fencing had always been Henry's talent. Here at his estate in Worthing, Silas had proved the best competitor of all Henry's servants, and an even better friend and confidant. Henry had known Silas growing up in Brighton. Born to a lower-class family, Silas had been in search of work. When Henry inherited the estate, he had offered Silas a position as valet. "How does your wife like the house?" Silas asked. Henry rubbed one side of his face. I believe she likes it. In truth, I cannot entirely decipher her opinions. She rarely speaks them. She is a very difficult woman to understand." Henry could not put it any other way. Eleanor was difficult to understand, and so was the draw he felt to her. At one moment she was detached and distant, and at another she smiled and appeared comfortable. He wanted her to always feel the latter, but he did not know how to put her at ease. Surely so much change was difficult for her to bear. It was difficult for him. He wanted Arthur to feel comfortable with him too, and it seemed he was already making progress on that matter. "Does your wife like you?" Silas asked. His freckles seemed to move when he smiled, dancing along with the teasing glint in his eyes. "What is not to like?" Henry smiled, stretching his neck and setting down his épée. He took a drink of water from his cup as Silas chuckled. Henry sighed. "In truth, I do not know. I cannot read her opinions if she will not state them aloud. Her face is of a most stoic sort." Stoic, but still lovely. The few glimpses he had seen of her smile had left him rather battered. He wondered how she would appear with a full smile, not just a whisper of one. He could not blame her for being so stoic. She had endured so much. She had every right to be afraid and to be cautious. All he could do was be patient and try his hardest to earn her trust. "You're a saint for taking them in," Silas said. "I married her," Henry said. "I did not just take them in. She and her son are now my family." "Right. That makes you even more of a saint, I'd say." Henry was tired of being called a saint, for being praised for what he did. It was what any man with a conscience might have done, and he answered to nothing if not his conscience. He was a slave to it. He was fairly certain he could not do something wicked if it would save his life. He would wallow in guilt for the remainder of his days. To marry Eleanor had not been a difficult choice. It had been his only choice. To love her, he did not know how to choose that. Grace had made it sound so easy. How could he love her if she did not love him in return? Was it even worth trying? "I want to make them feel at home here," Henry said, reminding himself of his most important goal. "I gather they have had a very difficult life. I wish for them to leave it all behind. I wish for them to be as happy as they deserve to be. But the problem of the matter is, I haven't the slightest idea of what makes a woman happy." Henry paced the room with his cup, thinking. Silas shrugged. "I'd wager she needs female companionship. My sisters were always happiest with a group of ladies in the sitting-room and a tray of tea in front of them. Content as a cat with a bird between its paws, they were." Silas nodded to emphasize his words. Henry considered the idea. "Yes, I think you may be right." "Am I ever wrong?" "Yes, more often than not." Henry tossed him a smile. "But I believe that idea holds merit." Silas chuckled. Henry knew his neighbours just a half-mile south to be a household of ladies. He would invite the mother and her 2 daughters to tea the next day, if Eleanor liked the idea. He would speak with her on the matter as soon as possible. "I suspect she would also enjoy a bit of frivolity," Silas added. "You might host a party or secure an invitation to one." Henry did not know how much Eleanor would enjoy frivolity, but he took note of the idea as he left the room. Once he was washed and changed, he crossed the hall to the breakfast room, finding it empty. As he passed the back door, he glanced out the window. Eleanor and Arthur were in the gardens, examining a rose bush. He walked out to join them, weaving through the shrubs and trees to where he knew the yellow rose bush to be located. They had not seen him yet, and he paused to observe them before making himself known. "These are like the flowers in your story, Mamma." Arthur's little voice was much louder and more confident than Henry had ever heard it. "Yes, they are." He could hear the smile in Eleanor's voice. Why didn't she smile around him? "Is yellow your favourite colour?" Arthur nodded, giggling. "How did you know, Mamma?" She laughed. Laughed. Henry had not known she was capable of it. Devil take it, he would earn a laugh from her eventually, if it was the last thing he did. He stopped a few feet behind them. "Would you like a rose?" Both Eleanor and her son jumped, whirling to face him. He held up his hands. "It is only me, not to worry." He smiled, hoping to erase the surprise and fear on their faces. Good heavens, they were a jumpy pair. He took in Eleanor's appearance, her black hair piled atop her head, with few curls left unpinned, and she wore no bonnet. He liked the style, for it gave him a clearer view of her entire face. She wore a pale pink morning dress, the sleeves reaching to her elbows, the bodice trimmed with white. Her pale skin provided a stark contrast to her hair and lips, and her blue eyes were striking. She shifted, her cheeks growing slightly pink at the centres to match her dress. He tore his gaze away, cursing himself for making her even more uncomfortable by staring so unabashedly at her. How had he not noticed her beauty before? "I am sorry to have startled you." He smiled, turning his gaze to Arthur. "Would you like a flower?" "No, but Mamma wants one." Eleanor shook her head, half her mouth lifting upward. "No, I would not have such a lovely thing plucked away from all its friends. Look, it is so happy." She pointed at the nearest rose, nestled among the leaves with all the others. Henry observed the whimsical expression on Eleanor's face, wondering how often it came, or how long it would last. He was beginning to learn that Eleanor liked symbolism. The story she had told the week before had taught him as much. He tried to decipher all he could from her words. plucked away from all its friends. Was she feeling much like a rose, plucked from a bush it called home? By marrying her, he had taken her from Brighton, the home she had been longing for so many years. Perhaps it wasn't just new female companions and friends that would make her happy, but her old ones as well. He would invite her family to dinner soon, or take her to visit them. Henry stepped closer, joining Eleanor and Arthur in their study of the flowers. "You are right. We shall not pluck any roses. I see the wisdom in leaving them here. Why take just one rose away to your room to admire it there, when you could come visit this bush each day and see dozens of them?" Eleanor touched one of the petals, staring lovingly at it. "I did not have flowers like this in the north. There was little to admire besides prickly moors." He studied her profile. "I will have even more planted if you wish." "I am quite happy with just these flowers." She glanced up at him briefly before returning her gaze to the rose. She lowered her nose to the bud, inhaling deeply. Henry turned to Arthur, bending down slightly to be closer to his height. His black hair fell over his ears and forehead, nearly covering his eyes. He would need to arrange a haircut for the boy. "Your mother has her roses. What is it you would like today, Arthur?" Arthur shrugged, his large blue eyes squinting against the sun. An idea struck Henry. "I told you I had tigers, did I not?" Arthur's eyes flashed with misgiving. "I don't want one." "I thought so. Would you prefer kittens?" Arthur nodded fast. "I like kittens." Henry's neighbours had a cat that had just delivered a new litter of kittens the month before, and he knew that at least 3 kittens remained in need of a home. He had not interacted too closely with Mrs. Morton and her daughters, but he thought they could possibly provide Eleanor with the female companionship Silas had suggested she needed. Mr. Morton was agreeable, so the women of his family were likely agreeable too. "I happen to know 3 kittens in need of a new friend. Would you like to see them today?" Henry asked Arthur. He glanced at Eleanor to ensure she agreed to the plan. There was nothing in her face that showed protest, so he took it as encouragement. "It isn't far. Would you be opposed to walking?" Eleanor shook her head. "I love to walk." "Perfect." Henry smiled, and Eleanor took his outstretched arm. The Mortons' residence took only 10 minutes to reach. The housekeeper informed them that Mrs. Morton and her daughters had taken a trip into town and would return shortly, but she gladly led them to the place where the kittens were kept under the shade of a bush in the gardens. "You ought to take one of them home," the housekeeper said. "The master doesn't know what to do with them. He can't keep 'em all." Henry watched with amusement as Arthur took tentative steps toward the kittens. 2 of the kittens were black, and one was black with white paws. Arthur sat down on the grass, reaching out to touch the velvet ears of the nearest kitten. The housekeeper knelt in the grass near him, introducing him to each cat and helping him hold one in his lap. "Arthur loves cats," Eleanor said, her abrupt words catching Henry by surprise. He glanced down at her. Though her voice was soft, it was sharp and clear. He never mistook her words. Her voice was slightly deeper than the average woman, but still feminine. He liked the sound of it. He had grown tired of shrill laughter and conversations with women that enjoyed being heard above their companions. Eleanor looked as if she were about to say more, so Henry simply nodded, listening. "We had a cat once," she continued. "Mr. Quinton brought her home shortly after Arthur learned to walk, hoping the cat would keep Arthur preoccupied in his room for more of the day. I named her Petal." She smiled slightly. "She brought a great deal of joy to our lives." Henry watched her expression fade to a fearful one, the spark of joy at the memory diminishing in her eyes. "What happened to her?" Henry asked, keeping his voice gentle. Eleanor took an audible breath, rubbing her palms over her skirts. Mr. Quinton decided he would rather have a dog. I never discovered what he did to Petal, and I did not like to dwell on it. But one day Petal was simply gone. Eleanor's eyes flickered up to his. Arthur was heartbroken. The dog was large and not well trained, and Arthur was afraid of him. Henry moved his gaze to Arthur, where he sat in the grass, rubbing the black and white kitten's tail between 2 fingers, giggling. Taking their cat was just the beginning of the harm Mr. Quinton had done before his death. It was likely only a small part of the things he had taken from them. Henry felt his jaw clenching. Anger roiled inside him, burning hot. I wish I could have been there to protect you from him. Eleanor's brow furrowed. From the dog? No, from your late husband. Henry met her eyes. She looked down at the ground. I wish it too, but you have offered us a way to escape, and that is more than I can ever thank you for. Henry had given a lot of thought to the day he saw Eleanor on her journey back to Brighton. Why had she lied to him about her husband's death? He sensed that she was still hiding something. What other reason could she have had to lie to him? His curiosity burned with questions regarding her husband's death and the elder Mr. Quinton's threats and accusations, but he couldn't bring himself to ask for answers. At least not yet. He did not wish to scare Eleanor away when she was finally speaking to him. Remember, he said, offering a teasing smile, you do not need to thank me for anything. She smiled at the ground, and he wished she would look up at him. Am I truly not allowed to utter those words? He shook his head before realizing she couldn't see it. You are allowed to do anything you wish. You do not need my permission. You deserve gratitude. I have to give it somehow. Henry rubbed his chin. You may show your gratitude by joining me for a ride tomorrow morning. My morning rides are rather lonely at present, and I want to take every opportunity to come to know you better. Eleanor met his eyes, a spark of hope entering them. It has been far too long since I have ridden. I enjoy being around the animals. Are you saying yes? Another half-smile lifted her lips, and Henry found himself enchanted by it. Yes. He held her gaze for a long moment, his own smile growing. He had never seen Eleanor this comfortable beside him. It was progress, to be sure. Mr. Beaumont, how do you do? A woman's voice met his ears from across the lawn. Strolling along the garden path with her 2 daughters was Mrs. Morton. She was a woman of very particular fashion, always wearing the most recent trend and instructing her daughters to do the same. Their gowns appeared to coordinate in colour, with each woman donning a peach accessory. Mrs. Morton wore a peach gown, Miss Morton a peach-trimmed bonnet, and Miss Beatrice a peach shawl. Mrs. Morton's smile appeared much less jovial than usual, her greeting less enthusiastic. Good morning, Mrs. Morton, Henry said. She came to a stop in front of them, her eyes lingering on Eleanor before returning to Henry. He felt he should provide an explanation as to why they were on her property without invitation. Your housekeeper said you would not be home. I hope we are not imposing. I wish to introduce my stepson to the kittens. Mrs. Morton exchanged a glance with her nearest daughter. Your stepson? Her eyebrows flew upwards, her green eyes flashing with surprise. I had heard of your recent marriage, of course, for the whole town has been speaking of it, but I did not realize it came with a child. Her eyes flicked to Arthur, where he sat with the kittens. Henry sensed Eleanor grow tense beside him. Yes, he is a very well-behaved, kind boy. I am honoured to have him, as well as my new wife. He smiled, fully noticing the disdain that dripped from Mrs. Morton's expressions. He slid his arm around Eleanor's elbow. She stepped forward, her smile shaky as she greeted Mrs. Morton with a nod. "Mrs. Beaumont." Mrs. Morton returned the nod, but with less depth. "I have heard so very much about you." Henry's chest tightened. Whatever Mrs. Morton had heard could not have been complimentary. The news of the missing Claridge girl had once been a very exciting topic of gossip, and even more so when the public heard of the scandalous elopement connected to it. Henry had known upon marrying Eleanor that his own reputation would suffer, and quite frankly, he did not care what Mrs. Morton and her small circles of friends thought of him or Eleanor. Eleanor surprised him by speaking. "What have you heard concerning me?" Mrs. Morton's eyes widened in surprise. "Well, She fluttered her hands. "Much. I have heard much." "I am curious as to what that means." Eleanor tipped her head to one side. She appeared genuinely curious, but Henry sensed a challenge in her eyes. Mrs. Morton's pride bristled, visible in the straightening of her shoulders and the huffed breath she let loose. "Very well. I have heard that you entered into a scandalous elopement with a poor soldier, leaving behind your family and leaving them to wonder over your whereabouts. Your husband must have died, it seems, for you to have married Mr. Beaumont. I am shocked to see that you have married again so quickly and are already out of mourning. As I said, I have heard much." Henry's anger mounted again. "I'm afraid you are wrong, Mrs. Morton," he said. "There is much that you do not know concerning my new family." Her eyes flashed. "Oh, I do not blame you for attempting to subdue the rumours surrounding your wife, Mr. Beaumont. Your own reputation is suffering as a result of hers." His jaw tightened. "The rumours you have heard are false." Mrs. Morton raised her chin. "I must rely on what I have heard to formulate my opinions of my new neighbours." Eleanor's voice came again, strong and inarguable. "To rely on gossip is to rely on uncertainty. The one who relies on truth will be both wiser and provide more pleasant company." Mrs. Morton scoffed. "There is nothing uncertain about your reputation, my dear. Nothing can mend it. You will take Mr. Beaumont with you as you continue to fall in society. I was sorely disappointed to hear of his marriage to you." "Have you no interest in learning the truth?" Henry wished he could throw the woman off the property, but the property belonged, in fact, to Mrs. Morton. He had never known the woman to be so condescending and rude. "The truth! The truth is that you will never be the esteemed son of an earl that you were born to be. You have been ruined by your association with this woman." Eleanor flinched, her posture slackening. Henry's gaze hardened. He needed to get away from Mrs. Morton now, before he did something that would ensure Silas and Edward never called him a saint again. He took Eleanor's hand, his heart sinking when he felt it trembling. "Arthur," Henry said, exhausting all his effort to keep his voice calm, "it is time to leave." The boy seemed to sense the tension around him, standing up quickly and taking hold of his mother's other arm. He stared back at the kittens as they walked away. Henry held his composure, but only just. How dare Mrs. Morton say those things? He had never met a person with such disregard for the feelings of others. Eleanor, who just moments ago had been smiling, now appeared far from it. The walk back to the house passed in silence. Henry needed to give his anger a chance to subside before he spoke. By the time the house appeared in the distance, he trusted himself to speak. "I am sorry, Eleanor. I did not know Mrs. Morton to be so dreadful." "She is dreadful, isn't she?" Eleanor avoided his eyes again, as if she were afraid to be near him again. She held tightly to Arthur's hand. blast, Mrs. Morton. Please do not believe a word that she said. Something like exhaustion appeared on Eleanor's face, clouding her features. She spoke some truth. I have ruined you. Society will not know you as the respectable son of an earl. They will know you as the husband to the scandalous Claridge girl. Her voice cracked. I am the one that should be sorry. Do not apologize. You have done nothing wrong. Her eyes glinted. Yes. Her voice softened, shaking, as if she were making a confession. I have. They had reached the back door, and she took Arthur by the hand. I do not feel well. With that, she opened the door, walking swiftly past it and out of sight. Henry watched the door close behind her, wondering yet again what it was that she was hiding from him. Chapter 10. Eleanor rushed up the stairs, her breath hitching and catching, just like her skirts under her boots. She picked up Arthur, who remained silent, lines of worry creasing his forehead. She tried to keep her expression even, but Arthur always knew when something was wrong. And something was very wrong indeed. As luck would have it, Mary was in Arthur's room, making his bed. "May I leave Arthur to play with you for a few minutes?" Eleanor asked. She nodded, apparently sensing Eleanor's distress. Eleanor set Arthur down to his feet, gently prodding him toward Mary, who took his hand. She did not wish for him to see her in such an uncollected state. She bit back her tears just until she crossed the threshold of her own room, closing the door firmly behind her. It would be just a moment. It would take just a moment for her to recollect herself. It always took just a moment. Eleanor breathed deeply, Mrs. Morton's words echoing through her skull over and over. Had Eleanor known what the consequences would be to Henry, she never would have let him marry her. He would grow to resent her for what she did to him. And if it was ever discovered what she did to her late husband, then Henry would be ruined for certain. She had almost told him, but then she had been too afraid. She did not want to put him in even more danger by giving him her secrets to protect. She sat down on the edge of her bed, trying to calm her breathing. A knock sounded at the door, and she froze. She had come to recognize Mary's knock, and this one was not the same. "Eleanor?" Henry's voice. Her heart leapt. "Yes?" "May I come in?" She crossed the room to the door, pulling it open. The sorrow and regret in Henry's eyes was unmistakable. Was he already regretting his decision to marry her? She would not blame him for it. She hid her emotions, crossing her arms as he walked slowly into the room. "Are you still unwell?" he asked, his voice so soft and gentle she felt a strange urge to run to him, to bury her face in his chest and cry like she hadn't in years. She shook the feeling away. "Yes, I am much better. I am just not accustomed to the heat of summer." Henry threw her a sceptical look, but did not press her for an honest explanation. She liked that about him. "There is something that I wish to say." Henry's voice was slow, as if to ensure she would not possibly miss a word. "I must clarify at once that you have not ruined me, not in the slightest." He stared into her eyes, his own gaze firm and resolute. "You have saved me. You and Arthur have both saved me from a life of loneliness and monotony, and for that I must express my gratitude to you." She didn't know how to respond. The threads of warmth that had grown all too familiar spread up her limbs and into her chest. He walked closer, and her heart picked up speed. His closeness always had an effect on her, whether it was a sense of security or belonging, all the strange feelings he had begun to stir up in her heart. She scolded her heart for caring about his words, for believing them. Hadn't she learned not to trust flattering words? No, words could not be trusted. Only actions could. Henry's actions had shown that he was noble in every way, yet she still hesitated to tell him everything. She was still afraid to let him close to her, to believe that he would not abandon her and Arthur when they needed him most. She squeezed her eyes shut against the memories that tore at her composure. Without warning, Henry's fingers touched her cheek. Her eyes flew open, and she flinched, pulling away and stumbling back a step. Henry's hand fell, his eyes flashing with hurt. He appeared embarrassed, and Eleanor's stomach twisted with guilt. She hadn't meant to act so afraid of him, but the instinct had come naturally. "I will leave you," Henry said, his voice quiet. "I hope you feel well again soon." Before she could try to explain, he turned around, exiting her room without another word. She pressed her palm to her forehead, fighting tears all over again. Henry did all he could to leave a wake of kindness and compassion behind him, in every word and deed. It seemed all she was capable of was leaving a wake of destruction in her path. A candidate for Arthur's nursemaid arrived a week later for an interview. Her name was Adeline, and she was quite young. If Eleanor would have guessed the girl's age, she would have thought her to be 16, with her youthful eyes and small frame. Even so, she seemed quite capable of performing the needed duties, and with her quiet, calm disposition, Eleanor thought Arthur would be quite comfortable around her. With Arthur now in Adeline's care in the early mornings, Eleanor had taken to spending her mornings in the gardens. She was not used to having time to herself out of doors, but she found she quite enjoyed it. She loved listening to the birds and inhaling the fragrant scents of the nearby rose bushes. She felt at peace there in the gardens. Her stone bench, surrounded by trees and bushes, had become something of a sanctuary. While outside one morning, Eleanor was presented with a letter. Her heart skidded with fear before she saw who it had come from. Adam. She tore open the seal, eager to hear from him. She was disappointed to see that it was quite short. "Dear Eleanor, I hope you are happy in Worthing, and that Mr. Beaumont is treating you and Arthur well. My wife and I have received an invitation to a dinner party on the 10th at the residence of the Marquis of Seaford. Do you remember my old friend Philip Honeyfield? He is now a marquis, and has a grand estate, which is likely the very last thing I would have imagined for his life to turn into. He has invited many of our friends from Brighton, and he was more than happy to extend his invitation to include you and Mr. Beaumont. I need to see you again, Eleanor, to ensure you are happy and safe. I hope you will come. I believe Mr. Beaumont will know where to find Philip's estate, Pengrave, in Seaford. With love, Adam." Eleanor held the letter to her chest. Could she ask Henry to take her to the party? He had told her never to hesitate to ask for anything. Part of her was still afraid to venture outside of Worthing. What if the elder Mr. Quinton found her? She reminded herself that the dinner party was being held in Seaford, so there would be no risk of being discovered by Mr. Quinton there. Had he already been searching for her? The thought sent prickles of dread over her spine. "Good morning." She jumped at the sound of Henry's voice. He was walking down the path toward her bench, each step tentative and cautious. "It seems I have made a habit of startling you." He chuckled, but the sound was half-hearted. She and Henry had hardly spoken since the week before, when he had touched her face and she had pulled away as if it had disgusted her. She hadn't meant to offend or hurt him, and the persistent guilt that had followed her all week was enough to drive her mad. She needed to show him that she did not fear him. "It is not you that is startling me," she said, turning her face up to look at him. Sunlight fell softly through the trees, illuminating the golden tones in Henry's hair and the streaks of pale blue in his eyes. "It is Mr. Quinton. My memories of him, my fear of his father." She shook her head. "It is not you." Henry sat down beside her. She looked down at her hands, afraid she would cry if she looked at his face, at the gentle kindness in his eyes. She still felt that she needed to explain her reaction to his touch, why it had been so startling. "Mr. Quinton hurt me on more than one occasion." She took a deep breath. "He never touched my face, unless to strike my cheek. He never touched me unless it was for his own purposes, his own desires, to hurt, to take, to control. And the only words he spoke to me were threats, followed by flattery that was meant to appease me." She dared to look up at Henry's face. His jaw was tight with anger, his eyes heavy with sorrow. She clung to the expression, knowing that it meant he cared. She had never confided in anyone about the things she had felt and endured over those years. The daily battle with fear and deciding whether to fight or submit to her husband's demands. How different Henry was from Mr. Quinton. She could not think of one similarity between them in either appearance or character, except, perhaps, the colour of their eyes. Both men had blue eyes, but the colour was where the similarity ended. Mr. Quinton's eyes had bled with darkness, and Henry's emitted light. Her heart pounded at the realization. She clung to Henry's light, to his nearness, to the feeling of trust that had begun growing in her heart. Even if he regretted marrying her, of taking her reputation upon him, at least she knew he cared about her. He slipped his hand around hers, and she didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Her eyes fluttered closed as a tear escaped, spilling down her cheek. She took a shuddering breath. "Eleanor." Henry's voice, soft, hoarse, met her ears. She didn't dare open her eyes. She couldn't. His hand, warm and strong, enveloped hers tighter. "You must know that I will never, never hurt you or Arthur." Her closed eyelids were not enough to contain her tears. They slipped out the corners of her eyes and down her cheeks. Peace like she had not known in years enveloped her, born from Henry's words and voice and gentle touch. "I know." She opened her eyes, Henry's face blurred behind the moisture in her vision, and she blinked to see him more clearly. His other hand lifted, slowly, carefully, until his fingers barely touched her cheek. She froze. He shifted, his gaze concentrating on each of her features as he traced his thumb over her tears, soaking them up and stealing them away. "Do not cry," he whispered. Her face burned under his touch, a barren flame flickering in her chest as she studied his face. The dark sweep of lashes, the faint stubble on his cheeks, the creases near his eyes from years of smiling, the golden curls that fell softly on his forehead. She tried to memorize it all, because a small part of her still feared she would lose him. She had been schooled to believe that that which can be taken will be taken. It is only a matter of time. Love, she had learned, was a weakness, and Henry was difficult not to love. His eyes settled on hers, and a small smile curved his lips. Her heart fluttered at the sight of it. She would have been quite content to stay on that bench forever, surrounded by warm sunlight beside Henry. "I came to see if you would still like to take the ride we planned last week," he said. She had forgotten all about the ride. "I would." She smiled, the action much easier now. "Also," she turned to where she had placed the letter beside her, sniffing away the last of her tears. I received an invitation from Adam to dine at Pengrave with the Marquis of Seaford in a fortnight. Would you like to go?" Henry smiled. "Yes, of course, but only if you will sing." "Sing?" Eleanor's eyes flew open. "I hear you each night with Arthur as you help him to fall asleep. I would venture to say your singing is the loveliest sound I have ever heard." "It cannot possibly be." He glanced upward, as if reconsidering it. "Very well. It is second only to the sound of Mr. Fiffet's compliments of my food, and the huffed sound Mrs. Morton makes when she is offended." A laugh bubbled out of Eleanor's chest. Just days ago, the topic of Mrs. Morton had not been even remotely humorous. She put her hand against her stomach, surprised by the uncontrollable laughter that struck her. "Now I must amend my statement." Henry's smile grew wider. "Your singing is my favourite sound, second only to the sound of your laughter." Eleanor's cheeks ached as she pressed her smile down to a reasonable size. "I'm sorry, I do not know what came over me." "You must never apologise for laughing and smiling." He crossed one leg over his knee. "The world needs more of that. It already has plenty of scowls and frowns." He cast her a sideways smile of his own, setting her heart kicking and pounding all over again. "Sometimes there are many reasons to scowl and frown," Eleanor said. Henry studied her, sadness flushing over his face for a moment before a smile overtook it again. "When you have a reason to smile, take advantage of it. I have every reason to smile when I look at you." Eleanor felt her cheeks grow warm, and she looked down. "First, you make me smile when you do that," Henry chuckled. "Do what?" "Look down at your hands as if they are the most interesting object in the universe." She had known him to be observant, but not so observant as this. "Or when you lift your chin with inquisition, as if you are offering an unspoken challenge." He had leaned closer to her. Eleanor glanced up at him from under her lashes. "I am quite observant too, you know." "Are you?" "Yes. You have the most curious stare I have ever seen." "A curious stare?" He raised one eyebrow. "Yes, just like that. You are curious as to what the curious stare is, yet you are effecting it right now." Henry laughed, resting his back against the bench. "Well, I am curious." "Always, but you do not always ask questions. It is as if you enjoy the process of wondering." Eleanor turned to face him more fully. "I suspect you ponder over many things in your mind, but hesitate to ask questions because you are afraid of causing offence." "There are enough people in the world willing and ready to cause offence. I do not wish to take part in it. I am certain I have caused offence to more than one person in my life, but never intentionally, and I believe that makes all the difference." "Surely Mrs. Morton was offended by our words last week," Eleanor said. She threw a guilty glance at Henry, and he laughed. "I will cause offence to anyone if it is done to defend your honour. That is the exception." She still could not fully comprehend why he showed such kindness to her and Arthur from the very first moment he met them. She stared at him, trying to decipher the answer in his eyes. "Is that the curious stare you accused me of?" he asked, eyeing her with suspicion. She looked down, taking no effort to hide her smile. "I was just thinking about what could have made you so kind. You are the most selfless person I have ever met." It was his turn to look down at his hands. Eleanor's heart skipped with admiration at the humility on his face, as if he were embarrassed by her praise. My mother taught me from a young age that the best thing you can do to find your own happiness is to help others find theirs. The best way you can succeed is if you first help others succeed. The best way you can shine in society is if you give others the chance to shine first. He stared at the tree ahead, as if lost in his memories. My older brother and I have always been very different. My father never paid heed to either of us. Edward did all he could to get his attention, and when he failed, he sought attention elsewhere. My father was not pleased. I took my mother's advice and spoke to my father often about Edward's strengths of character, hoping it would endear my father to Edward. I did all I could to help Edward succeed, yet I found no success of my own. Our father did not care for either of us, as a father should. He turned his gaze to her. Though I began to doubt my mother's words, I have never stopped trying to live them, and I have finally seen the truth behind them with you and Arthur. It is my dearest wish for you both to be happy here. Since you have come, I have never been happier. It eased a burden inside of her to hear those words. Henry was happy. He did not care about the disdain of society that she had brought him. Deep inside her mind, fear still lay in wait, prepared to strike at any moment. She pushed it away. What would Henry think when he discovered the lie she had been telling? How could he be happy then? I am happy here, she said, ignoring the gnawing fear in her stomach. Arthur is happy here too. I am glad to hear it. I hope I do not still frighten him. Not at all. I believe you have endeared yourself to him quite well. His trust is not easily won. Henry smiled. I hope to be a good father to him. Eleanor had no doubt that Henry would be. The hope of her future made her heart soar. For the moment, she focused on the foreign feeling that spread over her heart, trying to recognize it. She could have sat on that stone bench all day with Henry beside her. The feeling pumped and pounded and grew, reaching to every inch of her skin, until she could have no doubt over what it was. Hope, happiness, maybe even the possibility of love. Chapter 11. Have you found your wife some ladies to converse with yet? Silas asked, after swallowing a swig of water. Henry had spent the early morning practicing his fencing with Silas yet again, besting him in each match, fueled by the hope that had begun to burn inside him. He smiled. No, I tried and failed horribly. Mrs. Morton and her daughters had nothing but disdainful remarks to give. I suppose Eleanor will just have to spend more time with me. Henry was not at all opposed to such a thing. They had spent most of their days together since that morning in the gardens, and he could easily envision many days just like it. Arthur was growing increasingly comfortable in his company too, and Henry adored the boy. He planned to find Eleanor as soon as he finished fencing, in the hopes that they could take the ride they had yet to take. You aren't falling in love with her, are ye? Henry raised his eyebrows at the bold question from his valet, but couldn't help but smile. What is wrong with falling in love with my own wife? Well, that didn't answer my question. Silas combed a hand through his ginger hair, resting his elbow against the wall. Because he liked to irk Silas, Henry held his tongue, keeping the answer to himself. His feelings for Eleanor were altogether confusing, and he didn't care to explain it all to Silas. He had never imagined that she would have the effect on him that she did, that she would give him so many reasons to smile, or that his heart would stall when she walked into a room. He had been hiding the answer from himself, afraid of acknowledging it. Henry had not entered into this marriage with any expectation of love, and neither had Eleanor. It was possible that he would fall in love with her, but what if, in her sight, he remained a simple guardian figure or a friend? The thought stung, so he pushed it away. "Are you not going to tell me?" Silas gasped, pressing his hand to his chest. He waved a finger at Henry. "You needn't tell me. I already know the answer." Henry bit the inside of his cheek, picking up a towel and exiting the room. Silas's laughter followed him down the hall until the door swung shut. Eleanor had never seen so many books in one place. She had decided to explore the library in more detail, hoping to find stories to read to Arthur. Over the past several days, she and Henry had met in the library with Arthur in the mornings, beginning to teach him the basics of mathematics, reading, and geography. Eleanor was learning new things about Henry every day. She had not known that Henry had a desire to travel. He spoke of all that he had learned about India, France, and Africa through his readings. The passage of time came unnoticed when she was with Henry, and Arthur quite enjoyed learning from him. Eleanor learned much from him as well, things she had never been taught in her youth. Eleanor had done all she could to teach Arthur when they lived in the north, but her own education had not been as thorough as she would have liked it to be, and without books to teach him from, he grew bored quite easily. She would never grow bored in Henry's company, and neither would Arthur. When discussing a topic he was passionate about, Henry's eyes grew wide, his voice deep with conviction. She found herself fascinated by his words. The dinner party at Pengrave was just a week away. While she was excited to see Adam, she found that she was not as impatient as she had been when his letter first arrived. She was quite comfortable here in her new home. Her old worries had begun to feel distant and untouchable. It was as if she were growing a pair of wings, set on taking her to new heights, new destinations, and giving her the strength to fly. And she owed it all to Henry. In her previous experience, a husband was a man to fear, to submit to be controlled by. Henry contradicted that in every way. Of all the things he had been teaching her, that was the most important lesson of all. She had never thought it possible to fall in love with her husband. The feeling was so new that she didn't yet know what to call it. The expectation that had been set with their marriage at the beginning was that of a necessary arrangement. She had never expected to care so deeply for Henry. What if Henry did not care for her the way she had begun to care for him? He had told her that he cared for her, and she knew he did. But was it simply as a friend, an associate? At times it seemed that she was just something for him to protect, to watch over. Could his affection run deeper than that? It terrified her. She did not enjoy feeling so vulnerable. She had loved Mr. Quinton once, only to discover that his feelings were not the same, not in the slightest. She perused the nearest bookshelf, knowing Arthur to be waiting for her outside. She had left him for just a moment in the gardens. Henry had business to attend to in his study that morning, and she had planned to meet Arthur outside, where he would play and explore while she read. After selecting a book on botany, Eleanor made her way to the back door and outside into the warm summer air. She pulled her bonnet strings tighter, tipping the brim to better shade her face from the sun. With determined strides, she went straight to the gardens where she had left Arthur, near their favourite yellow rosebush. As she rounded the stone path, she found the area deserted. "Arthur!" Her heart pounded. "Please do not hide from me." She hurried forward, peering behind the bush. He was not there. "Arthur!" she called, checking behind the bench and behind the nearby shrubs. Her pulse quickened, and her legs began shaking. Where could he have gone? She had told him to stay by the rosebush until she returned outside, and he never disobeyed her. Could he have gone further out on the lawn to explore? As uncharacteristic as it seemed, it was certainly still a possibility. She carried herself into a run, threading through the gardens and back out to the more open area of the lawn. The stables were on the east side, followed by a copse of trees and a large hill that led to the path into town. She scanned the area, her breath quickening with fear. "Arthur!" A faint voice met her ears from the distance. "Mamma!" "Arthur!" She ran toward the sound, unease settling in her stomach. The tone of Arthur's voice was one of fear, and she had heard the tears behind it. "Mamma!" he called again, sobbing. The sound was closer now, as she ran across the lawn toward the trees. She glanced around frantically, searching for any sight of him. "Arthur, where are you?" She glanced upward when she heard the rustling of leaves. Arthur sat on a branch, far up in a tree, hugging the trunk. Tears streamed down his face, his cheeks splotched with red, his blue eyes round with terror. Eleanor pressed her hands against the bark of the trunk. "Arthur, what are you doing up there?" She had never known him to dare something as adventurous as climbing a tree. She had only left him in the gardens for a few short minutes. She noticed the scrapes on his arms. He seemed to have been in a great hurry to climb the tree. She measured the distance with her gaze. He was so high up. She couldn't possibly reach him unless she climbed the tree too. "I need you to try to come down," she said, reaching her arms up as high as she could. "Come down to that branch there." She pointed at the one just above her arms. "I will lift you down." Arthur shook his head, clinging to the trunk so tightly his arms trembled. She stepped back, taking a deep breath. "You must be brave, Arthur. Please try." "No." He shook his head, fat tears continuing their fall down his cheeks. He sniffed, his words barely comprehensible. "Grandpapa will come and get me if I don't stay up here." Eleanor's stomach contracted with dread. "What?" "Grandpapa will find me." Shivers tingled the back of Eleanor's neck, and she jerked her gaze behind her. What could have made Arthur afraid of the elder Mr. Quinton on a day like today? "Grandpapa is not here." "Yes, he is." Arthur removed one arm from the tree to rub his nose. "He saw me in the garden, and I ran away." Eleanor's heart beat so hard it hurt, pounding against her ribs. Her skin grew cold. It couldn't be true. Surely Arthur had been imagining it. "Did he follow you to the tree?" she asked. She couldn't help but make her voice quiet, for fear of being overheard by Mr. Quinton. She glanced behind her again. He was not here. He couldn't be. "No." Arthur took a shaky breath, his sobs subsiding slightly. "He was not really here. You must have had a nightmare." She said it more for herself than for him, trying to calm her racing heart. Still, her gaze darted in every direction. She saw no sign of the elder Mr. Quinton. Arthur remained silent, hugging the tree with both arms again. "You must try to come down." He shook his head. Frustration rose inside her. She couldn't leave Arthur there while she searched for someone to help them, especially not after he had claimed to have seen Mr. Quinton. As implausible as the statement was, she could not help but fear it. What if it were true? What else could have frightened Arthur enough to hide in a tree? She paced in front of the wide trunk, considering her own ability to climb it. Perhaps if she could make it to the branch she had instructed Arthur to step down to, then she could lift him down to it, climb back down herself, then lift him to the ground from there. She was fairly certain of her ability to get to that first branch, and she had worn her lightest morning gown, the skirt full enough to allow for climbing, as well as her sturdy half boots. "Very well, I am coming up to help you." She jumped and grabbed hold of the nearest branch, securing her foot on a knot in the trunk. The mottled bark dug into her palms as she pulled herself up, scraping the front of her dress in the process. She balanced on the branch, sitting as if on a side saddle. Arthur's feet dangled just above her. She gathered her breath and her balance, tipping her head up to look at him through the leaves. "Come now, Arthur, take hold of my arm and climb down here." She struggled to balance with one arm outstretched above her. Arthur looked down, his brow pinching, shaking his head again. "Do not be afraid. I will help you. You can do it." She reached a little higher, but he still refused to take her hand. Exasperation boiled up inside her. What else could she do? "What is happening here?" Henry's voice came from below, part amusement, part concern. Eleanor glanced over her shoulder. Henry stood just beneath her branch, staring up at her with a bewildered expression. "Arthur climbed up here, and I cannot get him down." She hadn't meant to sound so frustrated, but she could not help it. Coupled with the dread and fear that Arthur had placed in her with his mention of Mr. Quinton, she couldn't think clearly. Henry walked forward, turning his gaze up to Arthur. "Step down to the branch below you. Your mother will help you onto her lap, and I will lift you down." Arthur's expression seemed to calm, his arms loosening around the trunk. "But it is too far away." "I think you must be a very strong boy if you climbed up there all by yourself. It should not be so very hard to climb down. That is the easy part." Henry smiled, clearing the tension in the air with the gentle calmness of his voice. "Do not look at the ground. Just look at me or look at your mother." Arthur looked at the ground anyway. His arms tightened around the tree again. Henry sighed, reaching his arms up toward Eleanor. Before she knew what he was doing, he had a firm grip on her waist. Realizing he intended to help her down, she gripped his upper arms. He lifted her with little effort, placing her gently on the ground in front of him. His hands lingered on her waist for a brief moment, his face very near to her own. His eyes bore into hers, and she had to look away, her heart leaping from a combination of exhilaration, fear, and sudden longing. Her gaze landed on his smiling lips, which did similar things to her already pounding heart. "I never thought I would see you attempt to scale a tree," he said, the amusement returning to his voice. She could think of little else besides the way his hands felt, strong and warm through the fabric of her dress, and the way his lips quirked to one side as he spoke. She lifted her gaze back to his eyes. She was both relieved and disappointed when he stepped away, turning his attention to the tree. Henry took hold of the same branch she had been sitting on, hoisting himself up with much less effort than it had taken her. He reached upward, beckoning Arthur with his hand. "Come, there is no need to be afraid." To Eleanor's surprise, Arthur let go of the trunk, leaning forward with both arms outstretched. Henry grunted as his balance faltered, catching himself on the trunk before pulling Arthur into his arms. Henry handed Arthur down to Eleanor before alighting from the branch, landing heavily on the grass. Arthur clung to Eleanor, his arms wrapped around her neck and shoulders almost as tightly as he had held to the trunk of the tree. His face was buried in her sleeve. Henry brushed bits of bark from his trousers before meeting Eleanor's eyes with concern. "What compelled him to climb up there?" Her gaze darted around them again, surveying every direction. "He thought he saw Mr. Quinton on the property." Even as she said the words, her chest tightened with dread. Henry frowned, taking a step closer to them. "Your late husband's father? How could he have discovered your location?" "I am certain Arthur imagined it. I do not see how Mr. Quinton could have found us." She shook her head fast, unwilling to believe they had been discovered. Henry touched her shoulder with reassurance. There is nothing he can do to take Arthur. The courts will be on our side if he tries to regain custody. We have Edward to vouch for us, and it seems the Marquis of Seaford is a close friend of your brother's. We have connections that outrank Mr. Quinton's, and influence that he will never have. She exhaled a long breath. You are right, but it is still troubling. Yes. Henry rubbed his chin, glancing behind him. I will inform my servants to keep a careful watch on the grounds, and to direct any unwelcome visitors to the front doors. Would it be enough? Eleanor chewed her lower lip. Arthur, she said, keeping her voice soft. He lifted his head from her shoulder, his eyes puffy. Where did you see Grandpapa? Did he speak to you? He nodded. He was by the yellow flowers. He said he wanted to take me home. I ran away. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Henry. Are you certain it was him? Henry asked. Arthur nodded again, his chin beginning to quiver. I don't want to go with him, Mamma. I want to stay here. I know, she whispered. You will not go anywhere with Mr. Quinton. Henry stepped forward, brushing Arthur's hair back from his forehead. Arthur stared up at Henry, desperation in his gaze. Eleanor watched as Arthur's expression slowly relaxed. You are safe here, I promise. Eleanor held tightly to the promise. That had been the purpose for this marriage, to protect Arthur from Mr. Quinton. Had he found them already? Chapter 12. As the days passed, Arthur's description of Mr. Quinton on the property became less and less plausible. Henry had instructed all his servants to inform him of any sight of a stranger near their property, and thus far there had been no sight of him. If Mr. Quinton knew of Eleanor and Arthur's location, Henry could think of no reason why he would not call upon them to visit his grandson and discuss his desire for custody. Why would he sneak around the property without making himself known? He wanted to speak to Arthur with more detail on the matter, but he didn't wish to scare the boy when he was finally growing comfortable around him. So he strived to keep his time spent with Eleanor and Arthur light, happy, and free of worry. One morning when he ventured down to the breakfast room, he found Arthur with Adeline, his nursemaid, where she was helping him arrange a plate of food. Adeline glanced up when Henry entered, greeting him with her usual curtsy and smile. She was a quiet sort, much like Arthur. Henry supposed that was why they got along so well. Henry smiled down at him. Good morning, Arthur. Good morning. Where is your mother? She is still sleeping. Arthur turned his gaze to the fruit tray, pointing timidly at a slice of orange. Adeline served it onto his plate, taking it to the table and helping Arthur onto the tall chair. Adeline glanced at Henry as she pushed Arthur's chair closer to the table. The mistress was up with Arthur much in the night. He has nightmares, you see. I suspect she is very tired. Henry leaned against the wall. He could think of many reasons why Arthur might have nightmares, and all of them had to do with his previous home and the Quinton men. Adeline did not know what Arthur had been through there. Determination grew within him to be a positive influence in Arthur's life. Henry needed to give him a distraction from his troubled thoughts. Perhaps then he would not have so many nightmares. He sat down at the table beside Arthur, who glanced over at him as he took a bite of bread. Have you ever played with a bilbo catch before, Arthur? The boy shook his head, his cheeks full. He swallowed. What's a bilbo catch? Bilbo catch, Henry corrected, smiling. It is a toy that I loved when I was a child, and I have one just for you. It is a wooden rod with a handle that has a ball attached to a string. Would you like to play when you have finished eating?" A gleam of excitement entered Arthur's eyes, and he nodded, scooping up his food with greater speed. Henry fetched 2 bilbo catchers and returned to the breakfast room. When Arthur saw the toy, he finished his plate within minutes and slid down from his chair without Adeline's assistance. Henry extended his hand, and Arthur took it, walking along beside him until they found a place on the lawn. Henry handed one of the bilbo catchers to Arthur, who stared at it in awe. He held it as if it were a mysterious object, dangerous even. He had no idea of what he was supposed to do with it. Henry's heart stung to see that Arthur had never played with one before. It had been Henry's favourite pastime as a young boy, always creating competitions with Edward as to who could catch their ball in the cup consecutively for the longest. "You must grip it there." Henry pointed at the handle. Arthur adjusted his fingers to the correct place, glancing up at Henry for approval. "That is perfect. Now, see the ball that hangs from the string? You must thrust the cup into the air so the ball flies upward, then try to catch it on the cup." Arthur's brow scrunched in confusion, so Henry demonstrated. He stood with his arm in front of him, holding the handle just below the cup. The ball swung gently, and he waited until it was perfectly still. In one motion, he flicked the cup upward, sending the ball swinging in the air. He repositioned the small cup below it and caught the ball. Arthur smiled, a small giggle escaping him. He extended his arm as Henry had, waiting for further instruction. His first few attempts he failed to catch the ball, but after a minute or two he managed to catch it for a brief moment before it fell off again. "See, it is not so difficult." Henry smiled, patting him on the back. Arthur's grin had doubled in size since his first attempt, and he continued to swing the ball. Amid the clattering of the bilbo catchers, Henry hadn't heard the rushed footsteps behind him. "Arthur!" Eleanor's voice was unmistakable as she turned the corner that led to Henry's and Arthur's location near the gardens. Henry turned around, surprised to see the concern on her face. The moment she saw him, her posture slackened, her brow smoothing over. "Oh, I thought—" She stopped, biting her lower lip. "I did not know where Arthur was." She pressed her hand against her side, breathing heavily. "I was worried something had happened to him." Her voice still trembled. From exertion or worry, he couldn't tell. He was glad to see that she was relieved when she saw Arthur with him, but wished that she did not have to live in such fear. "I should have told you I had him with me," Henry said. "I wanted to let you rest." Her eyes flicked to the bilbo catchers, as if noticing them for the first time. Her expression lightened, a smile stealing across her face. "I have not seen one of those since I was a child." Henry extended his toward her. "Would you like to join us?" She met his eyes, reservation in her gaze. "Me?" "Yes, you." She took the bilbo catch gently, holding it in a manner quite similar to Arthur. "I'm not certain I remember how to play." She laughed quietly, studying every angle of the toy, as if it were a specimen meant for scientific study. He chuckled, noticing her grip was in the same place Arthur's had been, her hand wrapped around the cup. He moved forward until he stood beside her, carefully taking hold of the base of the bilbo catch, then taking her wrist in his other hand, sliding his fingers over hers. Every time he touched her, he was surprised by the effect it had on him. It never failed to set his pulse moving a little faster. His stomach flipped when her eyes met his. They were so blue. He returned his gaze to their hands, using his fingers to shift hers downward. "There," he said, taking a breath. "Hold it just there." He had trouble breathing in that moment, with all the sense of her, the smell of roses wafting up from her clothing. He took a step back. She stared intently at her bilbo catch. "And now do I swing the ball and try to catch it on the cup?" "Yes." Henry's voice had turned far too professional, as if he were instructing a pupil. He was instructing her, yes, but she was far more than his pupil. He cleared his throat. Eleanor gave it her best swing, catching the ball perfectly on top of the cup. She turned to him in triumph, her smile wide and bright. "Oh, look!" He laughed, warmth spreading through his chest at the image of pure delight on her face. She turned to Arthur, showing him the result of her first attempt as well. He grinned up at her, giggling as he tried again, showing no signs of discouragement as his ball missed the cup over and over again. Henry decided that he ought to introduce Arthur to spillikins and paper ships before he grew too old to appreciate them. Henry, of course, would always appreciate such games, and it seemed Eleanor would too. For several minutes, Henry watched as Eleanor and Arthur practiced bilbo catch, laughing and smiling like he had never seen before. He would do anything to keep them so content. His own smile grew with each passing minute. Eleanor eventually set her bilbo catch down in the grass, letting out a long, contented sigh. She turned to Henry, the dark curls on her forehead twisting slightly in the breeze. "Arthur seems to love it," she said, walking across the grass. Henry sat down beneath the nearest tree, and Eleanor joined him. They watched, laughing as Arthur spun in a circle, trying to catch the ball at the same time. "He does. I should have brought out the toy sooner." He glanced at Eleanor, surprised to see a sheen of moisture on her eyes, though her mouth still smiled. "I have never seen him so free or heard him laugh so much." Henry watched Arthur, deep affection and pride glowing within him. Arthur was not his son by birth, but he was his stepson. He had only known him for a matter of weeks, and yet the pride he felt for him was stronger than what he ever could have imagined he would feel for a son. "You remind me of my mother," Henry said. Eleanor eyed him, silently awaiting his explanation. "You truly care about your son, and you have taught him well. You are strong, loyal, and fiercely protective. He knows he can rely on you. If there is anything that should exist between mother and child, it is trust and love. You and Arthur have both, just as I had with my mother." Eleanor rubbed her fingers through the grass, plucking out blades one at a time. Her smile had slackened, and deep thought showed in her profile. "I believe that is true for any other relationship as well. Trust is vital." "And love?" Henry waited for her eyes to meet his, to see if he could decipher anything from them. He certainly couldn't by her actions. Did she care for him as deeply as he was coming to care for her? He believed that she was beginning to trust him, but he wanted more than that. Grace had told him that love was a choice, but when it came to Eleanor, he was losing all choice in the matter. He couldn't help but fall in love with her. His choice had been taken away when he first saw her smile and heard her laugh. His heart had surrendered. But Eleanor had been hurt by love, tortured by it, and had learned not to trust when a man told her he loved her. How could he expect her to believe him if he did? He did not want to ruin the friendship they were building. He did not want to ruin the trust he had worked so hard for by scaring her away. Eleanor glanced up at him, her cheeks growing pink at the centres as they often did. That must have meant something, didn't it? Eleanor was difficult to read. He still felt a distance between them, a gap he did not know how to bridge. "Love is very important too," Eleanor said, her voice soft and thoughtful. "I think love is not possible without trust. But when trust is betrayed, love begins to hurt and destroy the person that dared to love at all. Thus, love betrays that person too. There was passion behind her words. Her voice was strong, but a tremor could still be heard behind it. Eleanor began picking at the grass again, her shoulders square, her chin firm. Henry leaned closer, trying to draw her gaze back to his face. Do you not think love can also heal? Eleanor's posture softened, and she looked up at him. She was silent for a long moment before answering, searching his eyes. Yes. But only if you dare to trust first, and only if you let yourself be healed. Her jaw tightened, her eyes settling on his with a weight he had never seen before. She looked as if she were about to speak, her brows drawing together and her lips parting. Before she could say a word, Arthur ran across the grass, his giggles calling both their gazes. Look! He held up the bilbo catch, the ball resting neatly on top. Henry smiled, beckoning Arthur closer with his hand. I knew you would be very skilled with a bilbo catch, Henry winked. Arthur beamed with pride, settling down on the grass beside them. I like it, he said, studying the ball, rolling it between his hands. Eleanor laughed, leaning forward to ruffle his hair. I think you love it. He nodded, looking up at Henry from under his lashes. Henry chuckled, leaning back on his hands. His right hand settled in the grass directly beside Eleanor's hand, his index finger touching hers in the grass. He saw her arm tighten, but she didn't move, and her posture slowly relaxed. He adjusted his arm, his elbow brushing against hers. I am glad you like your new toy. Do you enjoy the rocking horse in your room as well? Henry asked Arthur. He nodded, just a small motion. Very much. When you are bigger, I will teach you to ride a real horse. Arthur's eyes shone with excitement, and he turned his gaze to the stables. A real horse? Of course. You will be a very skilled rider, I am certain of it. He nudged Eleanor. I believe your mother still owes me a ride. Eleanor's lips twisted into a grin. They had been meaning to take a ride every morning, but she had either been sleeping late after staying up so long with Arthur, or he had been busy in his study. Henry turned his gaze back to Arthur. Is there anything else you would like to have in your new home? Arthur looked up at the sky, as if he were deeply pondering the question. You may ask for anything you wish, Henry said. Arthur lay down, picking up a handful of grass just as his mother had. He was silent for a long moment before deciding on his answer. I want brothers and sisters. Henry dropped his chin, chuckling. Eleanor tightened, and he glanced at her face. Her cheeks had darkened to a deeper shade of pink. He and Eleanor had never discussed such a thing. When he did not respond, Arthur frowned. May I have brothers and sisters? Henry raised his eyebrows, not expecting to feel so uncomfortable. He felt his own face growing hot, and he was suddenly afraid to look at Eleanor. Blast it! Why was he being such a ninny? Perhaps, in time, we may have brothers and sisters for you. Could he have possibly sounded more pathetically awkward? He took a deep breath, glancing at Eleanor, who had begun plucking blades of grass again. Fortunately, Arthur seemed to be satisfied with his response, returning his attention to the bilbo catch. Henry did hope to one day grow their family, but he would give Eleanor all the time she needed to trust him, to love him, if she ever could. He would wait forever if it was necessary, and he would never give up on the possibility of a marriage of deep affection and love. He hoped it was possible. His heart pounded when he looked at her, at the pink that had begun fading from her cheeks, the tight pinching of her lips. He felt he was constantly at a battle between wanting to show her how much he cared, but being afraid of scaring her away. The slightest touch could frighten her. He wanted to kiss her, to hold her in his arms, but he didn't know if the risk was worth it. But blast it, he wanted to kiss her. Arthur began speaking about his rocking horse, and Henry suggested that he name it. Eleanor listened intently, offering her own suggestions. After much deliberation, the name Charger was decided upon, since the horse was brave enough to charge into battle fearlessly. They stayed beneath that tree until the afternoon, laughing more often than not, until rain clouds drove them inside. They went to the library to begin Arthur's lessons. Henry began to doubt the wisdom of giving him the Bilbo catch, for his lessons were much more distracted with a toy nearby. Henry found himself distracted as well, but for an entirely different reason. Why must his wife be so enchanting? The answer to Silas's question from a few days before was perfectly clear. He had certainly fallen in love with his wife. But trust came first, and he was still not entirely sure she trusted him. And he strongly suspected she still had a secret, one he would have to wait to uncover. As it was, he was not certain he trusted her completely either. Arthur went to sleep easier that night. There was something different about his eyelids as they fluttered closed, a certain contentedness that Eleanor hadn't seen in a very long time. She stared at him for a long moment, at the roundness of his face, the lashes that swept straight, so long that they bent against his cheeks. She bent over to kiss his forehead, her loose hair falling over his pillow. "Good night, little one." He was already asleep, but she hoped he could feel that she loved him and that he was safe. She blew out the candle beside his bed, taking the other candle into the hallway with her as she made her way back to her own room. The hallway was completely dark, aside from the soft halo of light that radiated out from her candlestick. Henry's door opened. She stopped as she passed the doorway, her heart jumping. She caught herself from dropping the candle, but only just. "Eleanor," Henry said, his voice lifting in surprise. "I thought you were already asleep. When I saw the light, I thought I had left a candle burning in the hallway." She had never seen Henry without his cravat and waistcoat. He wore his simple white shirt, untucked, his hair slightly mussed. She tried not to think of how shocking her own appearance must have been, with her hair loose, hanging down her back. And she was wearing her nightdress, her feet bare on the cold marble floors. He stared down at her, waiting for her explanation, it seemed. But all she could think about at that moment was how it might feel to bury her fingers in his hair, perhaps even contribute to the unruly appearance of it. She swallowed. It struck her as slightly humorous, then, that she and Henry had never seen one another so unkempt. But nothing about Henry's gaze was humorous as he stared at her with a weight she couldn't explain. "I was just about to go to sleep, actually. I am sorry to have disturbed you with my light." Henry's gaze burned through her as he took a step closer, glancing behind her at Arthur's door. "No, do not apologize. I heard that Arthur had a nightmare last night." She nodded. "Yes, but I believe tonight he will be much better." She avoided Henry's eyes, but she found her attention darting to his lips far more than necessary. What else was there to look at? She had often found his cravat to be a good alternative, but his cravat was regrettably absent this evening. "If there is anything I may do to help him, please come wake me." Henry's voice was quiet, as if he feared waking Arthur. "Oh, you need not trouble yourself. I can help him on my own." Henry shook his head. "You need not do anything on your own any longer." She was still learning how to accept assistance when she had grown so accustomed to not having it. Henry had already devoted his days to looking after Arthur. He didn't need to devote his nights as well. Yes, and I thank you for hiring Adeline. She has provided help before. Henry sighed, a sign of exasperation she hadn't seen before. That is not what I meant. A quiet whimper came from Arthur's room, the sound growing slightly before subsiding. Henry fell silent, listening. Eleanor knew it to be a common sound Arthur made in his sleep, and it did not usually signify a nightmare. I will ensure he is well, Henry said, taking a stride forward. You should go to sleep. Wait, Eleanor said, her voice hushed. She stopped him, pressing her palm against his chest without thinking. Henry stopped, his gaze landing on hers with that same weight as before. She found it difficult to pull her hand away. She could feel his heartbeat pulsing through his shirt, thudding against her fingertips. There is no need for that, she said. He will be just fine tonight. She started to lower her hand, but Henry caught it, holding it gently in his. She dared a glance at his eyes and immediately wished she hadn't. Her heart picked up speed. The combination of his closeness and his touch, and the heat and dim light radiating from the candle, was too much. Henry stared at her for a long moment. He released her hand, but the intensity of his gaze did not soften. She felt trapped by it, pulled by it, and it would not let her escape. If you are certain, he said finally, the words somewhat forced. She pressed her lips together, nodding. Henry's attention fell to her lips, and her heart seized. Just as quickly, he returned his gaze to hers. A fleeting thought crossed her mind. She wished he would kiss her. Did he want to? She caught a glimpse of longing in his expression, and she had to stop herself from stepping closer, filling the space between them. She tried to breathe steadily, but it was suddenly very difficult. When Mr. Quinton had kissed her, she had felt nothing. What would a kiss from Henry feel like? Emotion clawed at her heart, a longing to feel loved. Were Henry's feelings for her the same as her own? Did he wish to kiss her because he cared for her as deeply as she cared for him? She had none of the answers. All she knew was that she was falling, and she lacked the strength to catch herself. Henry drew a deep breath, taking a large step backward toward the doorway behind him. Good night, he said, his voice somewhat abrupt. Good night. She stepped back too, bustling far too quickly back to her own room. She closed the door behind her, leaning against the cool wood. With one puff of air, she blew out her candle. Chapter 13. Eleanor spent most of the next morning and afternoon with Arthur, reading some of the books she had found in the library. That night, she and Henry would be travelling to Seaford for the dinner party. She would have to leave Arthur at home, so she wanted to spend as much time with him that day as possible. Seaford was not far, and she knew Adeline would keep Arthur occupied while she and Henry were away. She hoped she could visit Brighton soon with Arthur to show him more of the town she had grown up in. But for tonight, he would have to stay home. She did not think a 4-year-old boy would be welcome at a dinner party at the home of a marquis. When late afternoon came, her maid helped her get ready for the party. She wore one of the gowns she had selected in Brighton with Amelia, a deep blue with short layered sleeves, a lace-trimmed neckline, and a matching satin sash. Mary styled her hair in a more elaborate arrangement than usual, piling most of her hair at the crown of her head, leaving a single tendril to circle the back of her neck, resting over her shoulder and bodice. She could hardly remember the last time such care had been taken with her appearance, and she was struck with melancholy at the thought of the days that were long past, when her mother had combed her hair at night. When she met Henry in the drawing-room to leave, He seemed surprised to see her so well presented. Of course he would be, after her unruly appearance the night before in the hallway. She took him in with her gaze. His hair had been neatly styled, and he wore a simple grey waistcoat. To her relief, his cravat was tied. At least she could have something to look at that did not send her stomach spiralling or her heart out of rhythm. "I am sorry I have been so absent today," Henry said as he walked toward her. "I understand that you are quite busy," Eleanor smiled. "Please, let me know how I may be of assistance in managing the estate." A small smile curved his lips, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "So, you are allowed to help me, but I am not allowed to help you?" She knew he was referring to the night before, when she had insisted on taking care of Arthur on her own, even though she had been exhausted. She looked down at her gloves, smiling. "No, I suppose not." When she looked up again, he was still smiling, but his voice was softer. "You are beautiful." Her heart leapt at his words. She had known flattery before, but never flattery so obviously genuine, mingled with a hint of shyness that sent familiar threads of warmth through her heart. His compliment was given depth through his smile, his eyes, and she knew he meant more than the fact that she had worn an elaborate dress and hairstyle. Henry always saw far deeper than that. "Thank you," she said. He brushed aside one of her curls. "Remember," he said, his voice low, "you mustn't thank me for anything, especially for declaring something so obvious." She couldn't stop her smile from widening. He extended his arm. She took his elbow, wrapping her hand firmly around it. Adeline brought Arthur into the room to bid them farewell. Upon seeing him, Eleanor felt a sudden pang of guilt for leaving. She had to remind herself that Henry had hired Adeline for a reason. Eleanor needed to do something for herself tonight, and Arthur would be well taken care of. He seemed happy enough to be there with Adeline, holding her hand and smiling up at her. Eleanor bent down to kiss the top of his head, and Henry ruffled his hair. Her heart warmed at the sight. "You be good to Adeline while we are away," Eleanor said. "Oh, I am certain he will be," Adeline said. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her voice seemed to shake, as if she were too shy to even say a few words. Eleanor stole another glance at Arthur. She had never been apart from him for an evening. It frightened her. She knew the servants to be capable of looking after him, but she was still slightly unsettled leaving him behind. Arthur's brow creased. "Will you come back soon, Mamma?" "I will be back to give you a kiss before you go to sleep tonight," Eleanor promised. "Perhaps Adeline will play Bilbo Catch with you." Arthur seemed to cheer up at that suggestion, glancing up at the nursemaid. "I like Bilbo Catch." Adeline squeezed his hand. "As do I." Eleanor gave Arthur one more kiss before Henry led her out of the room. She waved in the doorway. Adeline smiled, waving her own farewell in their direction.